Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf kaf hey. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the bottom of yesterday's daf. So we saw in the Mishna of among the different people who are disqualified to be witnesses, one of them is a gambler. And we saw a basic machloka between Rami bar Hama and Rav Sheshet. Rami as to why a gambler is pasul edu. So Rami bar Hama says it's because of asmachta. Because when you gamble, you don't really intend to ever lose your money, which means that anyone who puts their money down, which is potential money you can gain, you're actually stealing because they never really intended to pass you the money. And therefore, you're a thief. Rav Sheshet says it's because you're not doing anything productive with your life. You're just gambling your money away. That's not a good thing to do. To which we said, we're going to have a difficulty from our Mishnah on Rav Sheshet, on Rami bar Hama. Why on Rami bar Hama? Because the Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, when is a mesachek b'kubiyah, a gambler, pasul edut, bizman she'en lahem omanut ela hu. Only if that's their only job. Aval yesh lahem omanut shelo hu, they're ksherim. And therefore, the reason for the Mishnah, we're assuming right now that Rabbi Yehuda is explaining the previous section in the Mishnah. Why is Mesachek B'Kubiyah a gambler pasul? Because they're not ofsek b'yeshuvah shel olam, because they're not how do you say, they're not making the world a better place, right? They're not doing anything productive in the world, you could say. So now the Gemara says, the very bottom of Kaf Daled Amud Bet, L'chitem apligia Rabbanan alei Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe Tanakama disagrees, and that's the exact machloket. Rami bar Hama says, I hold like Tanakama, and Rav Sheshet will hold like Rabbi Yehuda. But Hama Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Kol makom shamar Rabbi Yehuda matai ubameh eno ela lefaresh divrei chachamim. So comes Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and gives a rule. Every time Rabbi Yehuda says ematai or bamet in the Mishnah, that means he agrees with Tanakam, and he's just trying to explain Tanakam. He doesn't disagree, which means that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree here because he says ematai, at least according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And Rabbi Yochanan Amal, he disagrees with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, but not about ematai. Rabbi Yochanan says ematai lefaresh u'bamelech lachlok. Depends which language Rabbi Yehuda uses. If he uses ematai, it's to explain. If he uses bameh, like bameh dvarim amurim, it's lachlok. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, no, also ematai, also bameh, is to explain. But anyway, we don't really care about bameh dvarim amurim. We're more concerned with ematai. And the Kulei Alma, both Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan think that ematai is lefareshu, which means that our Mishnah, according to both Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, who are early Amoraim in Israel, they both think that Rabbi Yehuda here is coming to explain. So what is Rami bar Hama going to say against that? To which the Gemara answers, wait a minute, Gavra Agabra Karamit? Why are you saying that Rami bar Hama has to fit in with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan? We have general rules in the Gemara. And Moraim have to fit in with Tanaitic sources. And when they don't, we have to come up with some sort of explanation. But they don't have to agree with every Amora, people from their own time period, from the time period of when the Gemara was written. Gavra Karami means you're bringing a contradiction between what two different people said, right? That happens all the time in the Gemara. People disagree. Mar Savar Pligi, you could say that Rami bar Hama thinks that Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing. He reads the Mishnah as Ematai. When is this? Is Rabbi Yehuda saying, I disagree with you, Tanakama. And therefore Rami bar Hama says, I agree with Tanakama. And Mar Saval, Lo Pligi, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan think they don't disagree, but they can do that. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute. According to what we just explained, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan think that they don't disagree, right? And that was pretty clear. It's pretty clear from what we quoted, starting from the end of yesterday's daf, that both Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan think, right, what we started with today, that ematai means he explains. But we're going to have a problem with this. V'hatanya, there's a brayta that says, Bein sheyesh lo amanut shelohu, that it's actually the Tosefta, whether he has an omanut shelohu, bein she, right, whether he has another job or not, or bein she'ein lo omanut elahu. In other words, whether this gambler has another job, doesn't have another job, haresa pasul. This person's disqualified. Now, if you hold like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's only if he has no other job, is according to everybody, but look in the Tosefta. It says either which way, he's going to be disqualified. So how can you explain that? Then it means If everyone agrees in our Mishnah, then everyone agrees. And then where's this other opinion coming from? Nobody holds that way. To which they answer, what do you mean? There's a third opinion. In other words, you could still say, like Rabbi Shua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, that in our Mishnah, both Rabbi Yehuda and Tanna Hakam agree that the only type of gambler that's disqualified is one who doesn't have any other job. However, the Braita, the Tosefta, is actually bringing a third opinion. And who is that? In fact, who Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfon here, we're now going to associate it with Rabbi Yehuda, the same Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda here in the Tosefta says it in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, meaning he's not bringing his own opinion, he's bringing somebody else's opinion. What's this opinion of Rabbi Tarfon? D'Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Tarfon. We're going to bring a sugya from somewhere else and say it's the same thing. Okay, La'olam ein echad mehem nazir, lefi shelo nitna nazirut ela lahafla'a. Okay, let's just go back for one quick minute. The gambler is a problem according to the Tosefta, no matter what, whether they have another job, they don't have another job, because gambling in and of itself is problematic. And that goes back to this asmachta issue, right? That it's not, you never really intended to put your money down. And when you don't have clear intent, we assume you're not actually planning to transfer ownership. You don't actually mean what you say. And therefore, again, you become a thief here. Now, where do we see that opinion here? In a totally different case, which is, can look at Rashi. Rashi says, what's the situation? Because they don't give you all the background. Shnayim yoshvim ve'echad over. Two people are sitting and a person walks by. Ze omer ploni ha'over nazirhu. V'ze omer eino nazir. They start an argument. Classic situation. Two people are sitting. See when someone walk by, and that one says, "Oh, that guy's a nazir," and the other one says, "What are you talking about? It's not a nazir. He's, he or she not a nazir." And then one says, "Hareini nazir, in kamotishu nazir." I'm so right. I know I'm right. If that person's a nazir, like I said, I'll be a nazir too. And the other person says, if that person's not a nazir, like I say, I'm going to be a nazir also. Okay, and that's even though he's not a nazir, but they're basically taking a bet. I know I'm right. I so know I'm right that if I'm right, I'm going to be a nazir. So now, shneim mitkavnim lenizirut, v'nimtza ke'echad mehem, right? They both intend to really be a nazir. They're so sure they're right, and they're taking on to be a nazir, saying, "I know I'm right." Well, if we eventually find out whether this person was a nazir or not, Rabbi Tarfon says, "Ein echad mehem nazir." Neither one is a nazir. Why is that? Lefi shelo nitna nazirut ela lahafla. You have to make a clear expression. You have to say, it says, ki afli lindor neder nazir. If you express, it has to be a clear expression. I am a nazir, not I'm taking a bet, and if I'm right, I'll be a nazir. No, it has to be definitive. That's the same thing as gambling. If you don't definitively pay money for something, right, put money on the table to actually plan to lose it, and then you don't really intend to give it up. That's the same thing as the nazir. If you're taking a bet, right, these are all like bets. You don't really mean it. So that is the opinion that no matter what a gambler is pasul, is disqualified from being a witness. But that's just not one of the opinions in our Mishnah. So we started with this Mishnah, assuming that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Tanakama, and we raised it as a question against Rami bar Hama, who seems to think that it's not only, right, it's going to be no matter what because of asmachta. And then we said, well, Rami bar Hama doesn't fit in, not with Rabbi Shua ben Levi, not with Rabbi Yochanan, to which we said Rami bar Hama understands the Mishnah differently. There's a machloka between them. Then we questioned those who say there is no machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama based on this Tosefta. And then we said the Tosefta is just a third opinion. Okay? Now we're moving on to the next section. Malved biribit, someone who loans money on interest, is disqualified as a witness. I'm a Rava. Rava now comes and says, Lava biribit pasula edut. Even if you borrow with interest, you're disqualified because both the borrower and the lender transgress a Torah law. And they're both doing it for the sake of money. Okay, now the malva is gaining money, but also the lova, the borrower, is also gaining money in the short term, right? They're willing to pay back more, but it's clear that they're desperate for money, so to speak. But doesn't the Mishnah say malve, which is only the one who loans money and not the one who borrows the money? Well, milve haba biribit. The way they understand malve is not malve, the one who lends, but a milve, anything associated with a loan on interest. Now we have a story. Barbanitus, that was his name. Ashidu Beitrei Sade, two witnesses testified against them. Chad Amar Kamedidi Ozif Berivta. One said, I saw him lend money on interest. V'chad Amar Lididi Ozfe Berivta. And the other one says, he lent to me with interest. Hasle Rava Barbanitus. Rava said, Barbanitus, you cannot testify because we have two witnesses who testified against you that you loan money on interest. But now they say, wait a minute, but was it Ha Rava? Something doesn't jive here. Ha Rava, who but didn't Rava just say anyone who borrows on interest is disqualified? And one of the witnesses testified about himself that he borrowed on interest. So how can we accept his testimony? He himself should be disqualified. V'havale Rasha, Torah Amra, right? He's a Rasha now because he borrowed on interest. He said that guy lent me money on interest. That means he turns himself into a Rasha. And the Torah says, Al Tashet Rasha Aid. Anyone who's a bad person, did something wrong, like borrow on interest, can't be a witness. So how do we accept that person's witness to disqualify the creditor, the one who loaned the money on interest? So you might remember Rava said this, and we're going to go back. Rava letame. Rava fits in with his own opinion in general, which we saw at the beginning of the Masechet. Da'ama Rava, Adam karov etzel atzmo ve'en Adam mesim atzmo rasha. Okay, a person is a karov to themselves, meaning you can't testify about yourself, not to incriminate, because people don't generally turn themselves into bad people. So the witness who testified about himself and at the same time about this other person, we're going to ignore the testimony about themselves, but accept the testimony about someone else. And this is what we called in that other sugya that we saw on Daf Tet, Palginan Diburi. We split the person's words. So even though they said that person lent to me on interest, we're going to accept the part about the person lending on interest, but not the part that they lent to that specific person. And therefore, that person, his testimony is accepted. But the one who he testified about now has two witnesses going against him, and his testimony won't be accepted. Now we get to a story. I'm going to talk more about the story when we get to the next page, because it's a little out of order here, I would say. But we're going to have a situation. Hu tabacha. We have a tabach. Okay, this opens up a super, super interesting topic. We have a butcher. De'ishtakach nafka trefuta. Sorry, de'ishtakach di nafka trefuta mitote yade. It was found that the guy was selling treif. Okay, meaning we have a butcher. This is classic in a Jewish community. There's a butcher for years been selling meat, and all of a sudden we find out that the butcher's been selling non-kosher meat all this time. They haven't been doing the shechita properly, right? You can imagine the scandal in the city. Major problem. Pasle Rav Nachman va'avre. So Rav Nachman disqualifies him from being a witness and fires him from his job and says you cannot be a butcher anymore. Azal, right? So number one, you can't testify, and also you can't sell meat in our city anymore. Azal Rabbi Mazia Vitorfe. So he goes to this butcher and he grows his hair and he grows his nails to show I'm feeling remorseful about what I did. Savar Rav Nachman lachshule. Rav Nachman thought, okay, he did tshuva. And this opens a huge question you deal with here and on the next amud, which is, how do we know when someone does tshuva, right? We have a whole book of the Rambam, a whole section in Mishna Torah, Hilchot Tshuva, how a person does tshuva between the person, right, oneself and God. And does God accept, when God will accept our tshuva? Obviously, we don't exactly know, but we know there's things that we can do. But when you're a community, it's much more complicated because nobody knows what's going on inside of anybody else. And how do you know, and here it's going to come up with someone who's disqualified for being a witness and also disqualified from doing their job, how do we know we're going to leave this guy out of our community forever? Maybe they really did serious repentance, but how do we know? Because they grew their hair and their nails, what? That's going to show? So it's a very tricky situation, as you can imagine, and very relevant. So now the question is, what do we do? So Rav Nachman thought to take him back, but Amar le Rava said, Rav Nachman, how can you take him back? Dilma Yerumi Kama maybe he's just tricking us, putting on external look to make it look like he's done tshuva, but he really hasn't. So Elamai Takante, so what can he do to get back? I mean, what, we're going to leave him out of our community forever? We're not going to let the guy make a living? We're not going to, let them testify? Well, Kid Rav Idi Bar Avin. As Ravi Bravin says, Da'am Ravi Bravin, hachashud ala trefot, ein lo takana ad she'elech lemakom she'em mikirim oto. He has to go. So Ravi Bravin said, someone who's chashud for selling treif meat has to go live in a different place. Have to go somewhere else where nobody knows who he is. Start up a new shop. Okay, v'yachzir aveda v'davar chashuv. Either while he's living in this new place, he finds some really expensive item, a diamond on the floor, and goes and returns it to its original owner. Okay, so we have something he has to show that he doesn't desire money anymore, because if he did, he would just keep it for himself, right? It's so easy. You find something on the street, just pocket it. Or or he opens up this butcher shop in another town because they don't know him, so they don't know he can't do it, and he ends up having a treif, an animal that ends up being a treifa, and he shows it to everyone and says, "Oh, look, this big piece of meat, it's bad." Okay, in other words, we have to go way far beyond. We have to know for sure that he did tshuva. Now, even these aren't really for sure, but we have to show that he's clearly not trying to. He doesn't worry about a money loss here. Okay, so we have to have something where, number one, right, and this is a little bit extreme, and we're going to talk about this later because we're going to see a bunch of other examples, and we're going to say, is this example more extreme because of the situation? And we'll talk about possible differences, or is it really just one and the same? It just really depends on what the scenario is. So we'll get back to this in a few minutes. Mafrichei yonim. So now we're on the next case in the Mishnah. Those who make birds fly, doves fly. We're not exactly sure what this means. So my mafrichei yonim, what is this? Hachatirguma in Babylonia, they explained, okay, this is like horse racing, but instead it's bird racing. Whose bird's going to get there quicker? It's a little different than horse racing, because horses, people ride on the horses, but here it's, just the animals on their own, just the birds on their own. Rabbi Hama bar Oshaya Amar Ara. Okay, what is Ara? So Rashi explains, Miluman lahavi yonim imkoman lebeit ba'alin al korchan. This is a person who knows how to get doves to come to him, okay, or to her. They basically do bird calls. And later we're going to see that the Gemara also seems to understand this, that they get other birds, they train doves to pull other doves toward them. And basically they steal other people's doves, okay? Now we're going to talk about doves, what it really means that we're stealing other people's doves, because people didn't really own their doves. The doves were in dovecotes, people had dovecotes, and doves would kind of flock to there, but it wasn't exactly theirs. But it's enough to be basically stealing, right, other people's stuff. So now we're going to see. Manda Amar, go back. Manda Amar the one who says it's these bird races, my tamalo Amar Ara. Why didn't he say it's Ara? Amar Lacha Ara is not really stealing, because like I said, nobody really owns the doves. And they own the dovecotes, but they don't really own the doves. So it's not appropriate. If you have doves in your dovecote and I go, call them to me, it's just not appropriate. But it's not exactly stealing, and that's why we're not going to actually make you disqualified. Manda Amar Ara, but those who say it really is, my tamalo Amar itak de why doesn't he say that? These bird races. Amar yeah, that's exactly betting. What is horse racing if not betting? That's gambling. It's the same issue as gambling, and that already appeared in the Mishnah, so there's no reason to have it appear twice. So now we're going to ping pong back to the first opinion. Good question. Why is it twice? Why is it there twice? So Amar V'idach Tana Tole B'dat. So the other opinion is going to say Tana Tole B'dat Atzmo v'Tana Tole B'dat Yono. We needed both cases, both of the gambler and the races. Why? Well, the bird races has nothing to do with you. You don't ride the birds. You have nothing to do with it. You could, try to bang some things together to make your bird move, but you don't really have control, as opposed to gambling where you have control, although you could say you don't really have control. Okay, those who like gambling, I don't know if you feel like you're really in control, but usually not. But here we're going to go through. But at least you can try to claim, I have a plan, I have a system, I've figured it all out. So it's tzricha. Now, why do you need both? Well, de'itana tole b'dat atzmo, if it's dependent on your own, what you can do, you're in control, you'll say, hatam hu lo gamro machne. Because I really thought I was going to win, in gambling, I didn't think I was going to lose because I thought I had control over it. And therefore, I really never intended to put my money down, which means that anyone who picks up my money now is a thief. So anyone in that room, including myself, is now a thief because they're picking up money that no one really intended to let go of. But right to Amar, Kim Libidinafshe, Diadana Tfe, turning now to Amabet, said, I think I know better, right? This is usually what people do in a casino, why often people lose their money because they think, oh, I could be really good at this. Aval tolebedat, you know, emalo, but you might say, but when it comes to the bird, you have no control over the bird, why would, you have no reason to believe that you can actually control this bird. V'itana tolebedat, you know, now, let's go the reverse. So why wouldn't you just have, right? You would say, Misachek b'kubiya, regular gambling, for sure. Your pasula edut. The chidush was the extra thing they needed to add was also the birds, because there you might have thought maybe you're willing to let go of your money because you didn't really think anyway you were going to win. But let's say we just gave the example of tolebedat yono, and if we say there it's asmachta, then of course in the first case it's going to be asmachta. So if you had tolebedat yono, this by the way is only really according to Rami Barhamu, who says the issue is asmachta. If you say tolebedat yono de amar benakasha talia milta va'ani adana lenakushe tfe. Now, what did I say before? You think when it comes to the birds, I can knock these bricks together or something. I can make the right. Rashi calls it dapim shel eitz. There were these wooden boards that people would bang together, and you thought maybe I could have control over that. It's like a physical thing, and people are often right. So one of the commentaries says this well. Physical is often easier for people to deal with than intellectual. And specifically, so you say that I thought I could bang my things together and get the bird to really move. V'ani adana, right? I know l'nekushet tfei, I could do that better. Aval tolebedat atzmo malo. But you might say when it comes to figuring out how to count cards, how to figure out how to win in a casino, that's beyond my capabilities. And therefore, you would say maybe not sricha. And that's why you need both. Okay, so if you have one, you wouldn't be able to learn the other. We saw it now in two directions. And that's how those who think that mafrichei yonim is bird races will have to explain the difference between that and gambling. If you think it's ara, then it's much simpler because you say one has nothing to do with the other. One is bird calling and attracting birds, and then right, and the mishchek b'kubiya is gambling, and those are two very different things. And then you just have to explain, right, that whoever holds ara thinks that attracting birds is actually stealing. Whereas the other opinion, who didn't think that was the issue, said it's not really stealing, it's just arkei shalom. It doesn't mean you're obsessed with money and trying to steal things from other people, and then you'll lie under oath. No, not necessarily. Okay, now we're going to bring a difficulty on this. And this is why we get to this, even though really it belonged earlier with the case of the tabach. Now we're going to bring up a tosefta, meitive. So now we have this contradiction because, okay, we're going to go through this very long braita. Only one line is going to interest us here when we get to the birds, the doves, but we're going to get off anyway because it's super interesting. And this, by the way, is quoted in Ala Tshuva of Soloveitchik, where he talks about doing tshuva and what it means to do tshuva and what kind of process you have to go through. And he brings up this tosefta. It's a very famous tosefta, very interesting. So first, they explain what this means. What is a misachek b'kubiya? Okay, why is a gambler called a misachek b'kubiya? These are people who are misachekim b'fsife. I don't know how to pronounce this. Bifsefasim, okay, or bifsefasim. I can't even pronounce it, but you get the idea. Bifsefasim. Below bisfasim bilvan amru ela afilu klipe gozim klipe ramani. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about that difficult word that I couldn't pronounce. What is it? So Rashi says, and there's different interpretations. Rashi says it's these wooden boards that they would play their gambling with. Okay, those were the implements they used in gambling, and not even real gambling implements, right? Like I'm thinking of a roulette wheel or something like that. But even klipe gozim and klipe rimonim, even if you just use something ad hoc for gambling purposes, like the peels of walnuts and the peels of pomegranates, that you could use that as props for, and make an ad hoc gambling game. Doesn't matter. Either which way, you need to do tshuva. Okay, you've done something wrong, or forget tshuva. Yeah, we're not up to the tshuva part, but you've done something wrong and you cannot be accepted as a witness. What do you have to do tshuva for something like this? And that's why the Rav Soloveitchik brings this up in Ala Tshuva, because this is all about how you do tshuva. How do you do tshuva? Mishayishabru et psafehen. Okay, you break the implements you have. V'yachzeru behem chazara gemura. And you have to do tshuva so far that like complete repentance. Ta'afilu bechinam lo avdi. You don't even gamble for fun, not for money, right? Like you play a game that's like a gambling kind of game, even though you're not going to lose money. Even that you can't do. You have to really, really distance yourself from the sin, okay? Not even to do it for free. And we're going to see similar things. And I want you to already start thinking, is this the same thing as what we saw with the tabach, or is the tabach case different? Malveh beribit, echad malveh ve'echad aloveh. This is what we saw before. Even the borrower, and even the lender and the borrower. Ve'ema, right? Because remember, the borrower is not necessarily making money on this, right? They actually have to pay more money, but still they're getting money in the immediate in order, right? And they're doing something that's forbidden by Torah law because they want money, so they're also, right? And obviously the one who loans on interest, which is getting extra money. When do they do tshuva? They have to tear all their documents, their IOUs. Now, according to Torah law, you just can't loan Jews on interest, but you can loan non-Jews on interest. But you have to also not loan or borrow money on interest from Gentiles as well. They actually really talk here only about loaning the money on interest. I don't know about borrowing. Mafrichei yonim, elu shemamrim et hayonim. Okay, so mamrim et hayonim, and here's going to be our key line. Which one does this work better with? So mamrim et hayonim really isn't exactly like either one of them, but Rashi says margizim otam zel yilachem. It's like chicken fights. Like you get chickens to fight with each other. Okay, you get these doves to fight with each other, something like that. But we're going to try to see which one this is closest to from before. Now they say velo yonim bilvad amru. It's not just birds, doves. Ela afilu behema chayav ha'of. It's also animals, domesticated and undomesticated animals, and birds, all other birds. Ve'matai chazaratan. What's the tshuva process for this? Misha yishabru et b'gamehem. You break your boards that they would use to get the birds to move, right, to fight with each other. You don't even do it in the desert. Okay, what that has to do, the desert, we're going to talk about this soon. But the desert generally, okay, now this, by the way, goes a lot better. You don't do it in the desert. It sounds like you're actually, okay, mamrim, even if we go with Rashi, it's not exactly clear what mamrim means. And it seems that what we're trying to say is it sounds like you're attracting birds to come with you, right? Because it sounds like you can look at Rashi, afilu b'midbar de lo shchicha yonim di yishuv, where there's not a lot of birds that belong to anybody. And b'hai perusha lishna de aranakile v'lo migufa de braiti. They say this line, by the way, is not part of the actual braita, and it goes according to the person who says ara. And if you say it's I taktemech yonach lion, if it's these races, you can explain the Chazarah Gemurah afilu b'chinam nami lo avde. Okay, and then you would have to say that you don't even race the birds for free. Okay, and then they're saying this is an add-on, so this isn't what's going to make or break which commentary we're going with. Okay, let's move on. So Charei Shvi'it, those who do business with Shemitah produce. Right? That's people who buy and sell Shemitah produce. So how, let's say you sold Shemitah produce, how do you do repentance? You have to wait a really long time. You have to wait till the next Shemitah cycle, and that Shemitah cycle you don't sell produce. Rabbi Nechemia says that's not enough. And this is a very important element of tshuva. You took money from people. You shouldn't have taken that money from people. So what does Rabbi Nechemia say? It's not enough to just say, I don't plan to do this anymore. Ela chazarat mamon. You have to actually return the money. Now, what's the problem? How are you going to remember, especially 7 years later, who bought produce from you in the Shemitah year? Well, Ketzad, so what do you do? Omer ani ploni bar ploni kinasi matayim zuz beperot shvi'i. You say, listen, I, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, I took 200 zuz of money last Shemitah cycle. I'm now giving this money to the poor. Okay, so you have to get rid of the stolen money. That's the end of this braita. And now the Gemara goes back to an earlier part that talked about the birds, because remember, we're trying to bring this on a difficulty on one of the commentaries, one of the options of the birds, what it is. Is it bird racing or is it bird attraction? Trying to get birds to get other birds to come, right? To train birds to train other birds to come with you. Katani mihat behema. Now it says there, even behema chayav of, which generally is less common that people do these things. That's why it said even. Even that is forbidden. So now it says animals. Now, behemot are domesticated animals. So the Gemara says, now, without really living there and understanding and breeding animals, it's hard to fully understand this. But if you say it's these races, we could see that maybe you take animals, domesticated animals, and race them against each other. But if you say ara, that you basically are training other birds, or in this case, it would be other domesticated animals, to pull other domesticated animals out of their abode, or pull animals from the wild, right? Like chayot, right? More wild animals, pull them and attract them to your house. That's just not true. Animals don't do that. Okay. Domesticated animals don't go out into the wild and pull other undomesticated animals to them. It just doesn't work. Okay. It doesn't happen. So, to which the Gemara says, so how could you possibly explain it that way? Which means this source is a difficulty on the Ara commentary, to which they answer, in Bishor Habal. Well, there's a type of shor, a bull, which is usually considered a domesticated animal, which is a bull that lives in the wild bull. And that wild bull actually could attract other animals. And Kiman Damar Shor Habar Min Behemahu. Now, there's a big machloket about a Shor Habar, whether we call it a behema or it's classified as a chayat. There's all sorts of halachot you have to know. Is it an animal or is it a domesticated or non-domesticated? Because there's different halachot when it comes, for example, for the forbidden chaylev. The fats are only on behemot, not chayot. So there's big debate about the Shor Habar. Now, if you say the Shor Habar is a behema, then we can find a case of a behema where this actually would fit. So it's only Lamanda Amar, Uchamanda Amar, the one who holds Shor Habar Min Behemahu. Ditnan, as we're going to see, there's a machloket about this. Shor in the Mishna, Shor Habar Min Behemahu, Rabbi Yossi Omer Min Chayat. This machloket is a Shor Habar, a Behema, or a Chayat. And you would have to say it's a Behema in order to understand the Tosefta in this way. Okay, so we resolved the question. This was all brought as a question. I just want to stop for a brief moment because it's super, super interesting topic, which is this Tosefta gave us a whole list for how we know whether someone really repented, right? They break their stuff. They don't even do it for free. They don't, right? They don't practice. They don't play gambling like it's just a game. They don't, right? All these different things. They don't lend Gentiles on interest either. And then we have the tabach case from this other side of the daf. Now the question is the tabach case, and here there's a lot of range of different opinions. Is the tabach case unique or is it the same? It's just if you're a tabach selling treif meat, your process for tshuva is different. Like if this was listed in the list of the Tosefta, it would just be another one like the others. And it's a little more complicated for some particular reason. Like, for example, some people say it's because it's not noticeable. It's in your heart, right? Nobody knows whether you have a treif animal or not. You're the only one. You shechted the meat, you know it's treif. Nobody else knows it's treif, so you can do it without anyone noticing. You can't go gambling without people noticing, right? It's a public thing. Or you go horse racing, betting, right? Those are all different kind of things than something that's hidden. You do in a hidden way, and because of that, maybe it's more strict. Perhaps it's on a totally different track because, first of all, you were in a position where you affected many other people. If you go gambling, that affects you and whoever else decides to go gambling, but it's not affecting the regular consumer on the street. Perhaps you need a higher level of tshuva for someone who's tricked other people in the community, right? Perhaps, right? There's all different ways of looking at this. Perhaps because it's your job. And some of the commentators say, well, because it's normally what you do in your job, you're so used to it. It's not like you went to the casino once or twice or you went to horse racing, but this is something you do all the time that it becomes such a part of you that you need a stronger level of tshuva. Right? So number one, is it a stronger level of tshuva? And then if so, what's different with the tabach? And then there's a multiple range of commentaries about that. Or is it the same? It's just, this is how we define it for a butcher, right? The track for him is like everyone's track is a little bit different for how to repent. And again, this gets to a super interesting broader issue. Since we don't know what's going on inside people's minds, inside their hearts, did they really repent? How do we deal with this as a community? This happens a lot. Someone in our community who does something bad, right? Your friend is mean to you, right? How do you know that they feel bad about it and they're really serious about it? So it's a fascinating question, and this is a sugya, and I think that's why there's so many different opinions about it, because when something's very relevant, right, everyone has to kind of take it to where they think it goes to. Okay, for another time, more in depth. Okay, let's go on. Tana, another bright. Hosifu alehem gazlanim v'achamsanim. Okay, so they added, this I think is also in the Tosefta, they added to the list of people thieves and chamsanim. The Gemara says, what do you mean they added to the list? As if like this was a later thought? Gazlan to oraitu. A gazlan is forbidden by Torah law. That's the one who steals. That's the one who's taking other people's money. Of course, you can't let them testify. Lo nitzracha ela lemitziat cheresho tepekatan. We're talking about somebody who finds an item that's really someone's, like a kid, right? Or finds a lost item and they take it. So the kid has it, but the kid doesn't really own anything because the kid can't do a kinyan or a cheresh or shote. Okay, if you haven't listened to Alana Stein-Haynes Din and Daf from a really long time ago, where she has a three-part series on cheresh, shote, and katan. What exactly are these three categories, right? The deaf is the deaf mute. A shote is someone not of sound mind. It's a big question what exactly it is. And a katan, a minor, all these people, their act of acquiring is not considered an act of acquiring, so it's not really theirs. So you could steal it from them now. You can't do it mishum darkei shalom, but you're not actually considered a thief by law. And that's why that must be the case we're talking about here. Someone who steals from a lost item that was found by a deaf, mute, or a shoter or a katan. Okay, so again, you can search Din and Daf on our site for the three categories of a cheresh, shote, and a katan, and listen to Alana's shiurim. They're fascinating about what the ramifications of these things are for us nowadays and how exactly we define who falls into these categories. Now, why were they only added later? Because in the beginning they said it's so rare that they would even have this and that someone would steal from them. So we're not going to say, okay, anyone who does this. We're going to talk about regular cases, more common cases. Or inami mipnei darkei shalom ba'alma, or they just said, look, it's only darkei shalom, it's not the biggest deal. But kevan dechazu desof from amono dekashakle. But in the end, they saw that whoever steals this found item by one of these people is actually taking it because they want the money, and they're taking it from somebody else, even if legally it's not theirs. They're still seizing it from somebody else who thinks it's theirs or would like it to be theirs, and therefore paslinu rabbanan. Well, this has the exact criteria of someone who should be disqualified for testifying. Ha-chamsanin. So why the chamsanin? Now, what's a chamsan? This is someone who forces people to sell them things. They give them money, but they force them to sell it. People don't really want to sell it, but they give them the money. They said in the beginning, look, they give them money. So what's the big deal? They're not stealing money. And therefore, a cry ba'almahu. It's just like, it just happens. They really wanted one thing. Okay, they took it. It's not like a cereal kind of thing. But they saw they were doing this by force, and they said, you know what, this really isn't appropriate. It's like they're stealing something, even though they were giving the money, and they said, we're going to disqualify these people. Tan, another bright about this. They also added the ro'im, those who graze with their animals, and then animals eat in other people's fields. Hagabaim, the people who collect taxes, and the muhsin. Those are two different kinds of tax collectors because, okay, we're going to learn about these as well. Ro'im, the ro'im, they thought the shepherds, maybe by accident they ate in someone else's field. But then they saw the shepherds were intentionally letting their animal graze in other people's fields and stealing their stuff. Gazru b'hu rabbanan, the rabbis forbade it. Hagabaim v'amuchsin. They thought that the tax collectors were just collecting what they were supposed to collect on behalf of the authorities. But then they saw they were taking more than they should be collecting and pocketing it themselves, and then they disqualified them. Doesn't matter what kind of animal you're grazing with, big animals, small animals, either which way you're disqualified. To which the Gemara asks, wait a minute, but wait, could Rava really have said this? Rava somewhere else says, Hama Rava ro'eh be'ema daka be'eretz Yisrael psulim b'chutz la'aretz shevim. In Israel, small animals, if you are a shepherd of them, you're disqualified. Why is that? because you're destroying the land of Israel. But outside of Israel, we don't care so much about the land. So it's fine if your animals graze and eat from the land. It's not going to ruin the land. Or if it ruins the land, we don't really care about land in Chutz La'aretz. But Ru'eh Behema Gasa, the big animals, afilu be'eretz Yisrael kshirim, it sounds like there's no problem in Israel. So why did Rava say here that the shepherds are all disqualified? And there it seems to say the shepherds in some other place. Rava said shepherds of big animals, it's not a problem. To which the Gemara said, Hahu b'migadlin itmar. That other statement of Rava wasn't talking about shepherds. Shepherds, it's a problem, any shepherd, because all those shepherds were taking their animals to graze in other people's fields. The question is, can you raise those animals? Now, what's the problem? Raising small animals in Israel, the animals sneak out because they're little, so they can get out very easily. They go under fences and stuff, and then they eat and they destroy the land. This isn't about stealing. This is just about eating and destroying the land. Outside of Israel, we don't really care about the land, so it's fine. Big animals can't sneak out, so we're not worried. So this is just raising. But grazing with animals is a different story. Hachinami mistaber, we can also further prove this from the following. Midikatani ne'emanim alai shlosha ro'ei bakar. Right, we saw this on Daf Kaf Daled, right, yesterday's Daf, that if you say, I accept 3 ro'ei bakar to be my, well, now my what, we'll see in a minute, then you can't change your mind once you accepted it. My lav le'edud, it sounds like it's for edud. And if you, right, what is this showing? They normally would have been disqualified, but if, right, now this is shlosha ro'ei bakar, these are big animals, and if they're grazing with big animals, right, they're disqualified, and only if you said, I'll allow it, then, it's allowed. Then we can accept them because you were willing, you said to the other side, if you want to bring those witnesses, I'll trust them, even though normally they're not. So it proves those who graze with large animals, bakar, or big animals, are disqualified usually. In this case, you already accepted it, so you have to, then it's accepted. To which they say, lo, who says that's for edut? It's ladina. Those are for judges. And in fact, how do we know it's judges? And then that won't prove anything. If it's testimony, what do you need 3 for? It would be 2, not 3. So it must be judges, and then it has nothing to do with our topic. The elamai ladina, wait, but you're going to say it's for law? What was the law there? The law was if you accept them to be your judges, then you can't change your mind about it. It's too late once you accepted it. Well, that would be true for any 3 people, right? Any 3 people you accept, you can't change your mind about. Why specifically are they talking about ro'ei bakar? So they say, no, hachi kamar. Read it like this. Afilu hani delo shliche b'yishuv. Now, any 3 random people might not be the greatest Talmidei Chachamim, don't know everything, but they know basics. But ro'ei bakar are the worst of the worst because they live outside. They don't ever deal with these kind of things. And the chidush there is that if you accepted those 3 people to be your judges, you can't change your mind about it. It's too late, even though they really don't know anything about anything. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda, last point here. Stam ro'eh pasul, stam gabay kasher. If you don't have any reason to think this person is a bad person, all you know about them is they're a shepherd, you can assume they're stealing. All the shepherds generally steal, or 98%, let's say. But the ones who collect taxes, not necessarily. Okay, and then we're going to start a story. Avua de Rabbi Zera Ava Gabuta Tleisha Shnid. He was a gabbai for 13 years. When the head of the river, the stream would come to the town, like meaning the person in charge. Rabbanan, he wanted to show that there weren't a lot of inhabitants, because the fewer inhabitants, the lower the taxes would be. So he was obviously a good tax collector. And when he saw the rabbis, he would tell them, Lechi ami bo b'chadarecha, which was a remez to, go into your rooms and go hide. He was quoting them a pasuk. When he would see people who weren't Talmidei Chachamim, he would say to them, Amar reish nara atalamata, the head of the town is coming. Okay, the way Rashi translates this is, which means, right, he's going to slaughter the father in front of the son and the son in front of the father, meaning he's going to collect money from you. So, go hide yourselves. Okay, and then we're going to see what happened with him and how he saved all these people from taxes. So we see that not all tax collectors are bad. Okay, quick review of our daf. We started with this machloket Rami bar Hama and Rabbi Rav Sheshet about why a gambler is pasula edu. We had to then reconcile that with, what about Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi Yochanan? We seem to think there's no machloket in the Mishnah, to which we said, well, there's a machloket. There's a third opinion in the Tosefta, even if you say that they both agree in the Mishnah, or Rami bar Hama also could just simply disagree, right? We really explained Rabbi bar Hama just disagrees with Rabbi Shua ben Levi's reading and Rabbi Yochanan's reading of our Mishnah, and then we said, well, how did Rabbi Yochanan make sense then? Because they think, how do you explain this Breita according to them? And then they said, oh, that Breita, which is Tosefta actually, is a third opinion. Okay, then we got to the Loveh Beribit, and we said it was not just someone who lends, also someone who borrows Beribit. And then we had the whole thing about Pagina and Dibura. We had that case where they disqualified someone, even though we said about himself that he borrowed, but that's because we don't believe a person to incriminate themselves. We had the story about the Tabach, the butcher, which we then compared later to the later stuff. We had two definitions of mafrichei yonim, what that means. We then analyzed them, and then also why didn't each one hold like the other, and then brought a Tosefta that contradicted. In that, we got back to the whole issue, like the tabach, of how we accept tshuva of someone when we know that they're really serious about their repentance, so we can accept them back to be witnesses. And then we moved on to a bunch of added psulei edut, like the gazlanim, the chamsanim, the ro'im, the gaba'im, and the muhsin. And then we talked about each of those different characters. And, we had some questions. What do you mean a gazlan? Isn't that usher by Torah law? And why did they forbid all the others? And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.